Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that, let's be honest, probably hits close to home for a lot of us. It's this, tricky line between thinking about our lives and actually, well, living them.
It really is. It's that space where introspection, which should be helpful, right? It can sometimes end up feeling more like a cage.
Exactly. And the material you've shared for this deep dive, it gives us a really insightful way into this. We're looking at bits from Brianna Wiest's 101 essays that will change the way you think. Specifically, a chapter called 12 Signs the Only Problem with Your Life is that you think about it more than you live it.
Wow, yeah. That title alone is pretty provocative, isn't it? It immediately flags this potential issue with how we're even engaging with our own reality.
It absolutely does. And so our mission today is really to explore this core idea from the text, that sometimes the biggest hurdle isn't our circumstances, it's how we're processing them. Or maybe getting stuck in the processing, which just leads to, well, inaction. We'll dig into these 12 specific signs the source highlights that suggest this might be happening. And what it says about why this happens and what it all means.
Yeah, the goal is to really lay out the patterns described in this essay so you, listening, can see if any of them feel familiar, maybe understand the framework the source is using for this state of thinking more than living.
So get ready for some potential, aha.
Yeah.
Moments maybe. Let's jump into this deep dive on what it looks like, according to this source, to possibly spend more time thinking than, well, doing. And the text kicks off with a really foundational statement.
It does. It says pretty directly, anxiety is usually bred out of inaction. We were born to actualize our potential, not just analyze it.
Wow. Okay, that first sentence alone kind of flips the script for a lot of people, I think. It's not that thinking itself causes anxiety, but the inaction that comes from maybe overthinking. That's the source.
That's the link the source is making, yeah. It suggests our default setting is towards actualization, towards doing. And when all that thinking doesn't lead there, it can become this breeding ground for anxiety. The text even calls it binge thinking. Like it becomes a way to avoid a problem, not solve it. Thinking should help living, not replace it.
Okay, that sets a powerful stage for these 12 signs then. It's about seeing when thinking stops being a tool and becomes, well, the main event. So let's get into those indicators the source gives. What's the first sign this might be going on?
All right, sign number 1 listed is, your goals are perfect outcomes, not perfect actions. So you're more in love with the idea of something than the actual work and, the process needed to make it real. When you dream up your perfect life, the focus is on how you're seen, maybe, rather than what your day-to-day tasks actually involve.
Yeah, that's relatable. It's like fixating on the shiny, perfect end result, often about how others see you without really getting your hands dirty with the messy everyday doing that builds it, like wanting the highlight reel without the training montage.
Exactly. The source is pointing out a disconnect there between the big vision and actually engaging with the steps needed.
Okay, moving on to the second sign the material points to.
The second sign is, you're a maladaptive daydreamer. And the source defines this as imagining these really extensive fantasies almost to replace human interaction or just general functioning. It notes this often happens during rhythmic activities, and it's framed as a way to escape through these grand alternatives. It gives you this kind of internal high to avoid uncomfortable feelings or, real world stuff.
So this isn't just casual daydreaming. It's more like an immersive, maybe almost addictive kind of escape inside your head that actually replaces dealing with reality and people.
Precisely. It's framed as avoiding the effort, the difficulty of navigating actual life by building this elaborate internal simulation instead.
Got it. The third sign the source mentions feels kind of related to that big vision idea again.
It is. It states, your purpose in life is abstract. The source explains this you want to help people or teach or give a voice to something important, but you don't really know how. And maybe more importantly, the source emphasizes that you don't focus on actually embodying that purpose right now in your present life, in your daily interactions, your choices.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the noble idea is there, but it just stays as this intellectual concept. It's not connected to concrete, small actions you could take today. It's stuck as a thought, not a way of being.
Spot on. It just lives in the realm of thinking about a possible future self instead of weaving that purpose into your actual present reality.
This next one feels like a particularly frustrating loop. Sign number 4.
Right. The solution to most of your problems would just be to make some small change, but you absolutely refuse to. The source calls this a classic example of using overthinking as deflection. It's described as this noble-seeming distraction you tell yourself you're analyzing until you find the perfect answer, right? But then, when the simple, obvious answer shows up, you still resist doing it.
So the complicated thinking is first an excuse for not acting, but even when the path is clear and simple, the thinking still becomes a way to avoid that straightforward, maybe uncomfortable action.
That's exactly the dynamic the source describes. The thinking turns into this sophisticated way to bypass obvious solutions, often because, yeah, they involve some difficulty or discomfort.
Okay, look at sign number 5.
You're always busy, yet never productive enough.
Hmm.
The source talks about, losing hours and not knowing where they went, feeling constantly stressed, like you're perpetually in the middle of some high-intensity thing that just never gets finished.
Yeah, that resonates. That feeling of mental churn, lots happening in your head, or maybe scattered effort, but without the tangible results you get from focused, intentional action. Busyness instead of actual productivity.
Right. The emphasis from the source is on that feeling of being overwhelmed and busy. But that state doesn't lead to concrete results or completion. Those come from directed action, not just activity.
Sign number 6 takes us into internal barriers.
Yes. You tend to resist what you want the most.
Uh,
The source suggests that instead of putting in real effort or letting yourself be vulnerable, you've built up these internal stories, you convince yourself you're not worthy or the goal's impossible, or that getting what you really want means you could lose it, so it feels safer not to even try.
wow. So that shows how thinking can build these elaborate internal defenses to protect us from potential pain or vulnerability. But in doing that, it stops us from going after what we most desire. The thinking becomes this complex self-sabotage driven by fear.
Exactly. It highlights how internal analysis can generate these really complex reasons for inaction that are rooted in these underlying fears, like inadequacy or loss.
Okay, shifting gears to sign 7. This one's about how we connect with others.
You're one of those people who only bonds over what you hate. The source actually gives two possible interpretations here. Either you don't have enough lived experiences to have more interesting, positive things to talk about, or there's an underlying insecurity driving this need to bond through shared judgment. Finding comfort by recognizing someone else is on your level through negativity, which is described as a way to feel momentarily superior because you actually feel inferior.
Huh. So is the source saying that relying on shared negativity to connect is a sign you're maybe not out there living and having positive things to share? Or that your internal world is dominated by insecurity that just comes out as judgment?
It frames bonding over dislikes as a symptom, yeah. Pointing back either to a lack of engagement with life's positives or this internal insecurity that uses judging others as like a defense mechanism.
Sign number 8 feels deeply connected to worrying about what others think. Kind of like that first sign about perfect outcomes.
It is. Most of your problems come back down to a fear of judgment or exclusion.
Hmm?
The source argues that if this fear is a big driver for you, it's often because a lot of what you think you like or do is really shaped by what you believe others will approve of. And this fear makes taking action incredibly hard because you're constantly analyzing how others might react, changing what you think you want based on that. And then you might still be paralyzed because you fear even this adjusted version won't be accepted.
Wow. So constantly thinking about potential judgment just creates this paralysis loop. You're not just living, you're running endless simulations of how others might react to your life, which leads to constant adjustments and ultimately just staying put,
Yeah.
inaction.
Right. The source suggests that when external validation becomes the main driver, it really digs in that overthinking cycle and just cripples authentic action.
Okay, moving to sign number 9. This one suggests a potentially powerful shift in perspective.
If you stopped and thought about it, you could come up with 10 things you are grateful for. The source's take here is interesting. It suggests your perceived problems might be less about genuinely not having things and more about not recognizing what you do have. It argues that gratitude naturally sparks more doing, more reciprocation, while positive feelings don't lead to the kind of stagnation and overthinking that focusing on lack can.
That's a really profound point, actually. It implies that focusing on what's missing keeps you stuck in that analytical problem-solving mode, whereas a state of gratitude, focus on what's present and abundant, naturally leads to more engagement and positive action.
Yes, it directly links a fundamental shift in internal perspective. From dwelling on lack to seeing existing value to a shift away from that stagnant thinking and towards positive engagement and, well, doing.
The 10th sign tackles how we approach change when we actually want it.
You want to change something about your life, but your focus is on dismantling the old rather than building something new that renders it obsolete. The source frames this analytical focus on the past as like trying to find comfort through complexity. It suggests this complexity is often a product of insecurity, maybe stemming from an inability or unwillingness to just accept the simple reality of a situation or a past event.
Okay, so instead of putting energy into building a new reality, a better future that naturally replaces the past, you're stuck picking apart or overanalyzing what already happened, maybe hoping that understanding it perfectly will somehow fix it without needing to build anything new.
It presents that over-analytical focus on the past as a diversion, really. A diversion from the proactive, constructive effort needed to build a different future. The thinking is pointed backwards, not forwards into action.
Sign number 11 brings us back to how we handle setbacks.
You look for quick solutions more than you focus on restructuring the questions. The source explains that when you fail at something, you might dwell too long on why you failed, getting stuck in that sort of post-mortem analysis. Instead of learning the lesson, moving on, and restructuring your approach to try something new, you stay suspended between knowing what went wrong and being unwilling to figure out, through action, what might actually go right next time.
This sounds like analysis paralysis, but applied specifically to failure. Getting endlessly bogged down analyzing the failure itself, rather than using that analytical energy to design a new experiment for success.
Exactly. It highlights a reluctance to shift from analyzing past mistakes to actively exploring new potential paths through trial and error, which is fundamentally a process of doing.
And finally, the 12th sign on this list.
You're always imagining what you want to do, yet never really doing it. And the source concludes this point by saying, you've convinced yourself that life begins when all the pieces are in place. But in reality, life is the act of doing just that.
That 12th sign perfectly captures the core tension we started with, doesn't it? Waiting for some mythical perfect moment before starting versus understanding that the state of having all the pieces in place is actually the result of living and acting.
It really brings us full circle to that initial idea. Actualization is the process, not just the end goal. Life unfolds through the doing. And waiting until all the thinking is perfectly complete is, according to this material, fundamentally missing the point.
So having walked through these 12 indicators and the opening thoughts from the source, what does the material really suggest are the underlying drivers? Why do people get caught in this loop of thinking about life instead of living it?
Well, like we touched on, the source directly links it back to that anxiety bred from inaction. It suggests that intense thinking, that binge thinking, becomes a method for avoiding problems, not solving them.
Right, so it's not just passive thinking, it's almost an active strategy, maybe subconscious, but active avoidance.
Yes, presented as that noble-seeming distraction, especially as the source notes, when the actual solution might be a simple, perhaps uncomfortable, change. And the source also connects it really deeply to underlying fears, especially that fear of judgment or exclusion we talked about, and just a general insecurity that comes from maybe being unable or unwilling to accept simple, sometimes hard realities.
It feels like the source is drawing a really clear line here. There's using critical thinking as a tool to help you live, make better choices, understand things, and then there's letting that same process become life itself, a substitute for action, often fueled by fear or avoidance.
That is the critical takeaway from this text, absolutely.
Yeah.
Analysis is useful, it has its place in informing action, but according to this material, when it stops you moving forward, when it hinders coping, when it stops you from embodying your purpose, or just becomes a barrier to making simple, necessary changes, it's crossed a line. It's not serving its real function anymore.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive exploring the material you shared has really shown a light on the potential traps of, getting lost inside our own heads sometimes. The central idea from this source is pretty stark. That divide between using thinking to guide living versus letting it become the main activity that actually prevents living, often leading, as it says, to anxiety fueled by that very inaction. Recognizing these 12 signs, according to the source, is presented as that crucial first step, the step needed to shift from analysis paralysis back into the process of actualization, of actually living.
Exactly. It offers a really concrete framework for self-reflection, doesn't it? Inviting you, the listener, to see if any of these patterns described in the source resonate with your own experiences or challenges you might be facing right now.
And that's where we'll leave you today. But with one final thought, kind of building on everything we've explored from this material. If, as the source suggests, overthinking often serves as this complex distraction, maybe from a simple change or a deeper, unaddressed fear. Consider this. What is one small action, maybe even a tiny step, that you could take today. Something that would completely bypass the need for more analysis and just get you moving.